Hello and welcome to this new lesson. This it's about the early Middle Ages and specifically the Byzantine Empire and the Germanic kingdoms, or some of the Germanic kingdoms, because there were many. So we are going to start from the Byzantine Empire. It's also known as the Eastern Roman Empire, as you know. It came out of the division of the Roman Empire made by Emperor Theodosius in 395, and it lasted more than 1000 years until 1453. So we know that there were some Germanic invasions over the Roman Empire. It started many years before, centuries before, but by 476, as you can see, the western side of the Roman Empire had been invaded by many different tribes, although the eastern side, the Byzantine Empire, still stood there. Okay, they did much better. They were richer than the West, and they had a good and powerful army, so they could avoid these invasions. In the West, we can see all of these tribes that we had been studying: the Angles, the Saxons, the Frankish, the Ostrogoths, the Burgundians, the Visigoths here, etc., etc. So what happened here? Let's go with the Byzantine Empire. Um, in the 6th century, at the beginning of the 6th century, we have the figure of Justinian, who reigned from 527 to 561. He was a powerful and a strong emperor, always helped by his wife Theodora, Empress Theodora. And here in this map, what we can see is the empire that he had when he acceded to the throne. And then on this kind of light orange color, what we see is his conquest. He wanted to restore the old Roman Empire. He considered himself to be a Roman emperor, just like the rest of the Byzantine emperors. He considered himself to be a Roman emperor. So he expanded his territory to the west, conquering the Italian peninsula, islands in the Mediterranean Sea, the north of Africa, south of the Iberian Peninsula. So he didn't conquer the whole of the old Roman Empire, but he did pretty good, and he expanded his territory a lot. So when he died in 565, he had the Byzantine Empire had been expanded all this area that you can see in this map. He is also famous because he made this compilation of laws called the Corpus Juris Civilis, probably one of the most influential books of laws in history. So every lawyer on earth has heard or has read something about this book, the Corpus Juris Civilis. It was like, let's say, like a constitution for the Byzantine Empire. He put together all the important laws, and so all his empire had the same rules. All right, then after him, the Byzantine Empire became a time of trouble, especially because they were at war with the Persian Sassanid Empire, which was to the east, but even more because in the early 7th century, the Islamic Empire started to grow, first with Muhammad and then with his successors, and all this green area corresponds to the Islamic Empire. So as you can see, they took over some areas of the Byzantine Empire here in the east, Syria, and what today is Lebanon, and what today is Israel. All this area that used to belong to the Byzantine Empire now belongs to the Islamic Empire. So here we can see some trouble in the Byzantine Empire. Then they went through some inner problems as well during the 8th and 9th century, especially this one, the iconoclastic controversy. It happened that the kings or the Byzantine emperors thought that the church was having too much power, or they were starting to be a threat to the emperor power because they were accumulating too much power. The patriarchs of Constantinople, they were too powerful and too influential. So some emperors and some people, some powerful people, started to say that it was disrespectful to have images of Christ or the Virgin Mary or some other religious figures in the churches. That was not respectful. That had to be forbidden. Okay, just like they do in some other big religions like Judaism or Islam, they shouldn't have representations. So that led to what we call this iconoclastic controversy, in which in many churches, all these religious figures that we call icons, these religious representations in the Byzantine Empire are called icons. They were removed from the churches, and as you can see here, they were thrown into the bonfire. But by the end of the 9th century, this controversy came to an end, and the icons prevailed, and the icons remained in the churches. So let's say that the pro-icons side of this controversy won the battle. Another big trouble happened in year 1054, when the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church split up. They split up Christianity in two sides. So the Pope Leon the Ninth was having trouble in Rome with his enemies, and he decided to ask some help to the Patriarch of Constantinople, who was Miguel Cerulario. Now, then he sent some messengers to the Patriarch of Constantinople, and it happens that Miguel Cerulario and Leon the Ninth, they were already they already had this struggle for power inside Christianity. Both of them wanted to be the first leader, or the true leader of Christianity. It was supposed to be the Pope. It was supposed to be Leon the Ninth, but when these messengers came to, or arrived to Constantinople, they were received by Miguel Cerulario, and he told them, now you have to call me ecumenic patriarch, ecumenic authority. That means universal authority. Well, the messengers of the Pope were not willing to do that because they paid obedience to the Pope in Rome, and they thought, or they believed, that the first authority in Christianity was the Pope in Rome, Leon the Ninth. So they refused to call Miguel Cerulario that way, to call him supreme authority, universal authority, ecumenical authority, and then Miguel Cerulario refused to admit these messengers in his palace. So he basically he kicked them away, and they had to go back to Rome. And that was the end. That was the end of this Christianity United. Miguel Cerulario founded what today is known as the Orthodox Church, and in basically based on Eastern Europe, countries like Greece or Bulgaria or Romania, Russia, and back then the Byzantine Empire, and then the western side of Europe remained Catholic under the rule of the Pope. This happened on 1054, and it is known as the Great Schism, or the East-West Schism. Okay, then let's skip some centuries in time, and let's go to the end of the Byzantine Empire. It happened that the Turks, a big kingdom with a great army, attacked Constantinople, and they stormed the walls with this huge cannon Canyon, which was the biggest one on Earth by that time. In 1453, they took Constantinople by storm and defeated the Byzantine Empire, and that was the end of the Byzantine Empire as we know it. All right, regarding the art in Constantinople or in the Byzantine Empire, we have to talk about Hagia Sophia, the Church of Hagia Sophia, or Church of Holy Wisdom, which is in what today is Istanbul. Of course, Constantinople today is known as Istanbul, and it's a work of art, an incredible work of art with these huge dimensions. This type of domes in the exterior were imitated all across the land, and today basically all the mosques that you can see in Istanbul are based on this model, on the model of Hagia Sophia. This is the interior. On the interior you can see these kind of triangular pieces over here. Okay, this was a Byzantine invention. Basically, this is the first place where they were used, and they were very influential because they allow you to pass from a square section on the floor to a round section in this vault here. Okay, so it goes through these triangular pieces, that are called pendentives. So this is a very important innovation in Byzantine architecture. Also, we have to talk about the icons, these kind of religious representations. Many times they were done in mosaics, but they were also painted, and they are very typical, and it's very easy to recognize them because they always use the gold color in the background. Okay, in order to remark the importance, the relevance of the topic, they use this gold color. All right, and then as usual, this kind of religious representation, saints and angels and the Virgin Mary and the baby Jesus. Now, whenever you see the Virgin Mary and the baby Jesus, that kind of representation is called Theotokos. Theotokos is Greek for Mother of God. Now, let's go with the Germanic kingdoms. There were many, but we are going to focus on the Visigoths and the Franks. So let's start from the Visigoths. Well, by the end of the Western Roman Empire, by the 4th and 5th century, there were many Germanic tribes trying to get into the Roman Empire. Okay, here we have some of them, but there were many more. Here we have the Angles and the Saxons, the Franks, Ostrogoths and Visigoths, also the Vandals. Okay, but there were even more, the Saxons, the Lombards, many of them, and all of them settled in what it was before the Western Roman Empire. Good. So the Visigoths got to Spain in year 415 because of two reasons. Because they were being kicked out of France. They settled first on France, and they had their capital city in Toulouse, which is a city in the south of France. But then they were kicked out by the Franks. The Franks were pushing from the north, and they also were kind of hired by the Romans, by the Roman Empire, so that they could help them to defeat some other tribes that had invaded the Iberian Peninsula. These tribes were the Suebi, the Vandals, and the Alans. The Suebi settled basically in the north. Then the Vandals went all through the Iberian Peninsula and then the north of Africa. And the Alans, they got to the central area and then they moved south. So the Visigoths were, let's say, hired by the Romans to fight the Suebi, the Vandals, and the Alans. And the Romans, in exchange, they promised them to give them lands and power and political positions. And since the Visigoths were huge fans of the Roman culture, they looked up to the Romans. They said yes. And that's how they settled in the Iberian Peninsula. All right. So now let's talk about some important kings. This is King Leovigild. He died in 586, and he was the one who defeated the Suebi once and for all, because the Suebi were hard to handle. Then we also have this king, King Recared. He died on the year 601. He converted from Arianism, who was a Christian belief, that that the Visigoths followed. This Christian belief consisted in recognizing that the Father had more power than the Son in Christianity. So, in other words, that God the Father was, let's say, superior than Jesus Christ, and so that Jesus Christ should be subjugated to God Father. That was not admitted by Catholicism, because in Catholicism they say that both of them are manifestations of the same God, so they are basically the same. And they had this struggle. So in order to finish this fight between Arianism and Catholicism, King Recared said, that's enough. Let's solve this situation. And he converted to Christianity. He converted, sorry, to Catholicism. He converted to Catholicism in 589 in the Council of Toledo. And this is important because finally there was peace in the Iberian Peninsula with this religious struggle. So now all the Iberian Peninsula was Catholic, and all of them could get along well. Apparently, because in reality they were always fighting. And then we have this other king, King Rexesvinth. He died in 672, and he became important because he made this compilation of laws called the Liber Judiciorum, meaning the Book of Laws. So it was similar to what Justinian did many years before in the Byzantine Empire, a compilation of laws that could be used as some sort of constitution for the Visigothic kingdom, so the kingdom would be unified. Eventually, there were many civil wars inside the Visigothic kingdom, so it was not a very strong kingdom because they were fighting. They had this inner trouble all the time. But anyway, they had this book of laws, the Liber Judiciorum. Okay, then by the year 711, the end of the Visigothic kingdom came because of the invasions of the Islamic Empire. So the Moors, who were the Muslims who used to live in the north of Africa, they crossed the Strait of Gibraltar for reasons that are not very clear, because it looks that the Visigoths were involved in a civil war, and then one of the contenders called the Moors to help him, and then when the Moors defeated the other side of the civil war, which was led by King Roderick, then they decided to settle in the Iberian Peninsula. But all of this is not very clear, but the point is that they crossed the Strait of Gibraltar, the Moors crossed the Strait of Gibraltar, and they invaded the Visigothic kingdom. They defeated King Roderick at the Battle of Guadalete in 711. Roderick was killed in that battle, so the Moors just started moving north and conquering all the land. As I said before, the Visigothic kingdom was not very strong because they were involved in many inner struggles. So it wasn't really difficult for the Moors to take over the Iberian Peninsula. They basically took over all the Iberian Peninsula in 4 years, which is really fast. Okay, now if we are going to talk about some of the Visigothic art, we have to talk about the horseshoe arch. This arch is called horseshoe because its shape, and it was a Visigothic innovation, and it was very influential in the next centuries or artistic periods. This one specifically belongs to the Church of San Juan de Baños, which is located in Palencia. This other church is called Santa Comba de Bande in Orense, And this is the typical Visigothic church. Solid, small churches, nothing to do with Hagia Sophia, for example. These are small churches, um, located, many of them in the countryside, and with solid walls, solid and big, thick, very thick walls, and very few windows. So this is the typical Visigothic church, and with this horseshoe arch that I told you before. They were also pretty good in goldsmith. They were good goldsmiths, so they had these beautiful jewels. This is the votive crown of King Rexesvinth. Votive crown means that it's not a crown um, intended to be wear on top of the head. It is intended to be an offer to God. So they were hanging from the ceiling on top of the altars inside the churches, and that's why they are called votive crown. Votive means offering. Okay, so they use these crowns as offers to God, full of gold and precious gems. Now, let's finish with the Visigoths, because the Visigoths were over when the Moors invaded the Iberian Peninsula, and let's go with the Frankish kingdom. The Frankish kingdom settled in what today is France. That's where the name France comes from. And the Frankish kingdom started with King Clovis. King Clovis became a Christian in 496, and the same day that he was baptized, he was crowned as king of the Franks. Okay, so he was the first king of the Franks, King Clovis. Now let's skip some centuries, and let's go directly to King Childeric III, who was the last of this dynasty. This dynasty, by the way, was the Merovingian dynasty. So Merovingian dynasty, sorry. So King Clovis was the first of the Merovingians, and King Childeric the third was the last of the Merovingians. So he was the last one of this dynasty. Well, he was dethroned by the mayor of the palace. The mayor of the palace was some sort of prime minister in the Frankish kingdom, but in theory they were servers of the king, but in practice they were more powerful than the king, and they used to declare wars, and they used to lead the armies in the battle, and they accumulated so much power that eventually Pepin the Sword, who was the mayor of the palace of Childeric III, decided to remove the king and became king himself. So he forced Childeric to abdicate, to pass the crown to him, and Pepin the Short put him inside a monastery. And in this picture, we can see how they are cutting his hair, because according to the tradition, some monks have to shave his head, and that was the end for him, and that's what the end of the Merovingian dynasty. Now Pepin the Short, since he's a new king from a different family, he's going to be the founder of the Carolingian dynasty. This happened in 751, and here is a family tree of the Carolingians, of the Carolingian dynasty. Well, here is Pepin the Short, which is also known as Pepin the Third. Well, he was, as I said, the first Carolingian king, and then he had several sons. One of them is Charlemagne, who is the one that is relevant for us right now. Charlemagne also had a brother, Carloman. Pepin the Short divided the empire for his two sons, but eventually Carloman died very quickly. So he was king of his share of the kingdom only for 3 years, and then Charlemagne occupied or took over of all the Frankish kingdom. All right, then Charlemagne had a son called Louis the Pious, who was the next emperor of the Franks, and then Louis the Pious had 3 sons, three major sons: Charles the Bald, Louis the German, and Lothair. And that would be the end of the Frankish Empire united. But we are going to go little by little. But it's good to see this family tree. It's good to know who was the father of who and who was the son of who. So Pippin the Short son was Charlemagne, and Charlemagne had a son called Louis the Pious, who became the next emperor, and then Louis the Pious divided the kingdom for his three sons: Charles the Bald, Louis the German, and Lothair. Good, so let's go with Charlemagne, king of the Franks from 768 to 814. So here is the thing. He inherited this section, basically this section in Central Europe. He was really afraid of the Islamic Empire because they already had to try to enter into the Frankish kingdom. They were defeated by Charlemagne's grandfather, but they were still a risk and a danger for the Frankish kingdom. So Charlemagne knew that the Moors or the Muslims were very good at sea, so they were basically invincible at a naval battle. So he concentrated in land. So he concentrated in making a big empire, unified under Christianity, because he thought that Christianity was a force of union, was unifying factor, a very important unifying factor. If all of us are Christian, then we can get along better and be united against our enemies. That is basically what he thought. So he created a unified empire in Central Europe under the rule of Christianity. So one of the most important conquests was this Saxony, the land of the Saxons, here in the north of Europe. Today this territory is called Sajonia in Germany. And he was fighting the Saxons for many years, for around 20 years. And eventually they converted to Christianity, so that was the way they surrendered. Now he also conquered the reign or the kingdom of the Lombards. The Lombards were kind of harassing the Pope in Rome, so he defeated the Lombards and the Pope, and him became close friends, and the Pope was very grateful. So that way he gained the Pope as an ally. Okay, so he became king of the Lombards, king of the Franks and the Lombards, and he also went to Spain here. And he made some alliances with the Counts of Catalonia in order to create this area here known as the Spanish March. The Spanish March was a military border created to separate the Muslim Iberian Peninsula from the kingdom of the Franks. So that way, if the Muslims had wanted to invade the Frankish kingdom, they had to go through the Spanish March first, which was heavily defended by the Frankish army and the army of the Catalonian counts. Alright, so these were their main achievements. And then in the year of 800 he became emperor of the Romans. This is what happened. There was this pope here called Leo III, and he was having trouble with his enemies in Rome. For some reason he was accused of several crimes. True or not, we don't know, but he was put under arrest, and then he asked for help to Charlemagne. Charlemagne got to Rome and told his enemies, the enemies of the Pope, that the Pope cannot be judged because the Pope is appointed by God himself, so he cannot be judged. And since Charlemagne got there with a huge army, the enemies of the Pope had to say yes, had to accept this, and the Pope was put back on his throne. Since the Pope was very grateful, and also to assert himself, he crowned Charlemagne as emperor. So he was saying, yes, look, I am grateful to you, and I am crowning you as emperor of the Romans, but see, I still have this power to crown you as an emperor, okay? So you have to kneel before me, and then I crown you as an emperor of the Romans. Good? So that is another landmark in Charlemagne's career. But then he died in 814, and his son Louis the Pious became the next emperor from 814 to 840. He didn't have the same military talent as his father, so he had to struggle with many enemies. His kingdom decreased in size, and besides he had some rebellious children, and his own sons revolted against him, and for some years he was kicked out of the throne by his own sons, and then he went back, and when he died, he decided to divide the kingdom for his sons to see if that way the kingdom could survive, and the sons could get along well with each other. Now this didn't happen. This didn't happen because his sons didn't get along well. Charles the Balts, Lothairs, and Louis the Germans. If we go back to this family tree, we can see that here is Charles the Bald, Louis the German, and Lothair. The three of them are children or sons of Louis the Pious, with different women, but that doesn't matter. They were sons of Louis the Pious, okay? And Louis the Pious was the son of Charlemagne. That means that Charles the Bald, Louis the German, and Lothair the First were Charlemagne's grandsons. So here we have the grandsons of Charlemagne, that they didn't get along very well, and they fought each other. So the worst part was Lothair's kingdom, because he was in the middle of two contenders. So eventually Louis the German and Charles the Bald absorbed Lothair's kingdom, and they formed their big kingdoms. Charles the Bald kingdom became what today is France, and Louis the German kingdom became what today we know as Germany. Although many things happened in between, okay, so we cannot say that France was like today's France and Germany was like today's German, because they were different borders, different size, but we could say that this was the origin of today's France and today's Germany. All right, good. So this basically is the end of this Carolingian Empire, because it's been divided. And now let's see something about the art in the Carolingian Empire. This is what remains from the Palace of Charlemagne in Aachen. Aachen is in North Germany today. It was the most important city in the Carolingian Empire. So what still stands today is the Palatine Chapel. This one is, as you can see here, it has this geometric shape. It is an octagon. It is an octagon that has a lot of influence from the Byzantine art. And if we see this side view in the interior, well, we can see how it is in the interior. This octagon was the main nave, the central nave. Here we see the altar. And here on the second floor we see this figure here. This is Charlemagne attending the mass. Okay, this is where Charlemagne used to attend the mass when he went to church. Good. This is the inside, a real picture of the inside. As you can see, it's impressive. It's really impressive with all these semicircular arches with these columns inspired on classical columns. This ceiling, this vault here, inspired on Byzantine icons. You see the golden color all the way, the icons, etc. So this is a quite impressive example of Carolingian art. This is the throne of Charlemagne, which it is basically located over here in the second floor, and it's made out of marble. And here is where he attended the mass, as I said before. Good. So that's basically it. I hope everything is understood, and if there is any question or something, you can ask me in class or send me an email. So that's it. I hope you like it.